evening and welcome. I am Amarachi Ubani. Tonight, at least 5 police officers killed as security operatives and suspected herdsmen clash in Numan Council, Adamawa State. The National Agency for the Control of AIDS raises concern over lack of access to antiretroviral drugs as UN report says HIV infections on the rise in Nigeria. Independent petroleum marketers threaten to shut down operations in Delta State over leadership tussle. And former U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Flynn admits making false statements to the FBI about meetings with Russian ambassador prior to the 2016 presidential election.
On Business News tonight, Consumer Protection Council set to launch automated complaint mechanism aimed at easing customer objections filing process in 2018.
While on sports news, the Super Eagles of Nigeria are drawn against Argentina for the 5th time at the World Cup Finals in Russia 2018.
And from Abuja, Northern PDP divided over zoning of party's chairmanship position to the southwest ahead of its national convention next week.
We begin tonight with the killing of 5 police officers by men suspected to be herdsmen at Bolong village in Numan local government area of Adamawa State. The attack follows a clash between police officials and the suspected herdsmen, who were said to be planning a reprisal on the communities in Numan local government area before today's clash with security operatives. A few days ago, the Inspector General of Police deployed 500 additional officers to keep the peace in the area, following recent clashes between the herdsmen and farmers. Troops of the Nigerian army have been drafted to the area to stop the violence. The spokesperson for the police in Adamawa State gives an update.
Men were deployed to this trouble zone to restore normalcy, and they were on patrol when some part of the warren ambushed them, and as a result we lost our men. There was no any casualties. It was just our men that were lost. As I speak with you now, they have been evacuated to Mortuary Numan. Normalcy has returned to that area, and our men are on the trail of those that have perpetrated that day. No arrest has been made so far. We are still investigating. It's an issue that would blow it out of proportion. But then we are still working on it, and we want to make it public whenever we get the full details.
Beyond our shores now, the president has arrived in the coastal city of Akaba in Jordan, where he is joining other heads of state to review strategies in fighting terrorism and reinforcing joint security structures that will be more proactive in preventing terror attacks. President Muhammadu Buhari is expected to share Nigeria's experience on terrorism and its spread across West Africa, with a view to soliciting more support for preemptive measures that will help neutralize the activities of insurgents in the sub-region. President Buhari and his delegation will also attend an official dinner to be hosted by King Abdullah II in honor of visiting heads of state and their delegations. The conference, tagged Akaba Retreat, is being attended by West African heads of state, representatives of governments of 48 countries, and a number of key non-governmental organizations. A new report from the United Nations says new HIV/AIDS infection in Nigeria is on the rise, and more than 2,200 people are infected, and more than 200,000 new infections are reported every year. The report also says there is an estimated 3.2 million people living with HIV and AIDS in Nigeria, and 2/3 of these population do not have access to treatment. That's why the 2017 World AIDS Day is focusing on how to increase access to treatment for people living with HIV/AIDS around the globe.
We have resolved The first day of December every year has been set aside by the United Nations since 1989 as World AIDS Day to raise awareness on HIV and AIDS. According to the United Nations, an estimated 36.7 million people globally live with HIV/AIDS. Majority of this population do not have access to treatment. In Nigeria, over 3 million people have the virus. 2/3 of this figure are not on treatment. At a symposium to mark the 2017 World AIDS Day in Abuja, the Director General of a national agency for the control of AIDS, NACA, decries the lack of access to antiretroviral drugs in Nigeria.
We certainly need to increase investment in the health of our citizens. We need to optimize our response strategies, and we need to strengthen our coordination and accountability frameworks to achieve optimal returns in our investment in health. In addition, the National Assembly has already committed to the implementation of the National Health Act provision of 1% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for health from 2018. I think this is a major and important move. This is a great opportunity for our country to increase investment in health. It will enable us to identify those crucial resources we need.
While analyzing government's efforts to increase access to treatment, the Minister of Health calls for collaboration with state governments to make antiretroviral drugs.
In absolute terms, it is estimated that about 3.2 million people live with HIV/AIDS in Nigeria, ranking only second to South Africa globally. Access to care by those in need remain a major challenge. It is equally worrisome that PMTCT services are available to only about 30% of the pregnant populations annually. In order to scale up HIV/AIDS services over the long term, significant financial and human resources need to be mobilized. The strategies to be deployed include increased resource mobilization and improving efficiency gains in service delivery. In this regard, I am happy to inform you that the government of Nigeria is working hard to reverse the trend of a donor-driven approach to our national HIV program.
Notwithstanding the progress made in combating HIV/AIDS in Nigeria, mother-to-child transmission still accounts for over 90% of new infections, as an estimated 40,000 children are born annually with the virus. Hence, experts insist on the need for government to urgently increase access to treatment for people living with HIV/AIDS.
Let's talk more about the issue now. Being joined at the news at 10 live from our studios in Abuja by the Director General of NACA, Dr. Sani Aliyu. You're welcome to the news at 10. Well, the rise in HIV infection rates in Nigeria, according to the UN report, is quite disturbing, wouldn't you say?
Well, I wouldn't call it a rise. Remember, the numbers have been much higher than before. If you look at the prevalence of HIV back in the early 2001, we were talking about well over 5% of the sexually active population having HIV. What the UN report actually said was that we have 220,000 Nigerians acquiring the HIV virus every year. That's on average about 600 a day. That's considerably less than what it was some years back. In terms of the number of people on treatment as well, 10 years ago we had only 130-something thousand Nigerians on treatment. We've just crossed the 1 million mark. And that's a major achievement for any country. South Africa is the only country that has 4 million people on treatment. So looking at the size of our epidemic, I wouldn't say we are there yet. It's certainly not Uhuru. No, we still have a lot of work to do because we still have about 2 million Nigerians that need to go on treatment. But we're making progress, and it's slow but steady, and we intend to get there.
What are the factors that have contributed to the rise in the numbers?
So again, I would say, well, I wouldn't call it a rise in the numbers. I would say what's contributing to the new infections. And what's contributing to the new infections is a multiplicity really of factors. What we have are predominantly young girls between the ages of 15 to 24 contributing to a large number of the new infections occurring. We also have what we call key populations, the most at-risk population, possibly contributing up to 45% of all new infections. And we know over time that awareness as far as HIV is concerned has been waning generally in the community and society in general, partly because people have fortunately stopped dying from HIV. With the provision of antiretrovirals and more people coming on treatment, there are fewer people living with HIV that are dying. People are still dying, but what I'm trying to say is not in the sort of numbers that we had a decade or more ago. So yes, there is a need for us to look at our prevention strategies. But one of the reasons why we're concentrating on treatment as well is because with more people coming on treatment and becoming virologically suppressed, the less the likelihood of transmission. So overall, by putting people on treatment, you're not only dealing with the individual, but you're also helping the public health aspect as well.
Have we identified the parts of the country where these new infections are being observed?
So Nigeria has a mixed, what we call a mixed epidemic with a very wide geographical variation. At the moment, we have about 9 states that have a need of at least 75,000 people living with HIV requiring to go on to treatment. But at the same time, we have about 9 states that have more than 50% of the people living with HIV on treatment. So some states are doing better than others. Right from the beginning of the epidemic, we know that there are parts of the country that have relatively higher prevalence than others, and this is due a variety of factors, including awareness, education levels, issues with culture, etc. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we should change our focus. I think every person living with HIV needs to go on treatment. People need to be aware of their status, regardless of whichever part of the country they are in, because every part of the country would have somebody living with HIV that needs access to treatment.
You did mention during the conference in Abuja the poor access to antiretroviral drugs. Could you tell us more about that?
So what we are concerned about is not really necessarily poor access, but the need to ramp up treatment and where these resources will need to come from. We have 1 million Nigerians on treatment, but we estimate we need to have 2 million more to go on treatment if we're really going to achieve epidemic control. It costs about 50,000 naira per patient per year to keep somebody on treatment. At the moment, out of the 1,050,000 on treatment, 60,000 are paid for by the federal government through the Taraba and Abia program, which is, so we've got 2 states. And then the remaining 1 million plus are paid for by external donors. Essentially, that means that 95% of those 1 million plus Nigerians on treatment are being treated courtesy of a foreign government. And that clearly creates a situation where you have a program that is not sustainable, because that sort of arrangement cannot continue for another 5-10 years. And therefore, we need to identify those additional source of funds to not only put those 2 million people that need to go on treatment, but to also keep the 3 million in total on treatment until the end of their lives, because they need that treatment. We talk about a right to health, which is the main World AIDS Day theme for this year. And for people living with HIV, that right to health equates to right to treatment, because it's the access to the drugs, the antiretrovirals, that will keep them healthy and will give them a good life. So, yeah, so it's a multi-tiered approach, certainly, but we have to work with the state governments, the private sector, health insurance, and find innovative ways of financing the program.
I appreciate your being here tonight. Dr. Sani Aliyu, thank you for joining us on the News at 10. In part 2 after the break, early morning fire raises over 1,000 shops in a building materials market in Kaduna State. Please stay with us.